You know, one thing I like to do in my videos is pretend to be way angrier than what I actually am. That doesn't mean that all of my anger is fake, it just means that I play along with the character to try to humor the audience a little bit. In other words, I might call someone a waste of oxygen when I just simply disagree with them or think that their argument is slightly stupid, that sort of thing. Exaggerated, but still with roots in reality. It's one thing I like to do, because I legitimately believe that something was lost when we lost the angry reviewer and angry commentator side of YouTube when YouTube started bringing in the overly restrictive guidelines to the point of where people can't even swear or mention no names in history and that sort of thing. And one thing that you really didn't see back in the day, but you see a lot of now, is that this character, this act that you sort of can play, seems to have an effect as to where a lot of people will simply not understand what you say or disagree with what you say just because you said it in a way that might be somewhat provocative. In the sense that you may say one of the most basic things in the world, you may make the most basic, simple, and agreeable statement in the world, and people will find a way to disagree with you just because you say it in a way that people don't like. It's something that you see a lot in real life where you'll have a personality, I'll just leave it at that, say something very basic, and they'll call you the worst names possible, or they'll call that personality the worst names possible just because it was said in a way they don't like. Case in point, my review of the Fallout show and the meme follow-up video I made right after that. Well, I say I didn't actually make it. I requested someone on Kratos' Discord server to make it, and they allowed me to re-upload it on my channel. In the off chance that you haven't watched it, basically I go through the show episodically, splitting it in 2 plot lines because there's multiple plot lines going on at the same time in that show. And I address very basic things: bad writing, inconsistent writing, lore breaks, bad CGI, bad editing, and even though this is related to the writing, some of the worst dialogue that I have ever seen, which is not even appropriate to what Fallout is. The Fallout franchise has always been a mostly serious franchise with occasional satire and parodies of real-world situations, real-world people, real-world ideologies, which drew people in not so much for the gameplay, because let's be honest, the gameplay of even the old games, and to an extent New Vegas, kinda sucks and is jank to a lot of degrees, but because of its storytelling, its writing, and its nuances and complexity. A very philosophical franchise, and I know I might get laughs for that, but I legitimately do believe that it is a philosophical franchise, because it manages to critique not only the ideals that people may have associated with different ideologies, but it also manages to critique the inherent human aspects, such as the human aspect to fall to ambition, to oversimplify and look to the side just because it's the ideology you agree with on the surface. Take the NCR, New California Republic faction in those games. A faction/country riddled with issues and very hypocritical down to the core, you could argue. A faction that endlessly preaches values, humanity, human rights, democracy, and all that. But then you can effectively boil down a lot of what they do not to fighting the good fight and high morals, but because of resources and the desire for resources and an increase in power and influence. Where the troopers will tell you they're fighting for a good cause, that they're there to sacrifice themselves in the name of California, but then you turn around for 5 seconds and the first thing they complain about is the lack of gambling in the assignment, where many of them are willing to let the population of a location starve just because they're not citizens. I'm referring to how they treat the citizens of Freeside, by the way. It's complex, is what I'm trying to say, and overall the themes of Fallout are very, very serious, but occasionally you'll have dialogue which is humorous. Such as a woman, Cass, despairing, desperate, depressed at the fact that she just lost her family business, her namesake, who spends her days drinking her sorrows away in an outpost that has absolutely dick all to do in, telling you about Long Dick Johnson, who had a long dick, thus the name. Now, from that description alone, you might have understood that that's one person, right? That's one person, that's one joke that they go along with, that's one character who may be more humorous, less serious on the surface, and you would be correct. Just like you would be correct in assuming that there's more to the story when you meet a bunch of scientists who turn themselves into robots with their brains in it, gone so insane from centuries of isolation and focus on science that they no longer understand what the concept of hands even is. On the surface level, it can be humorous, or in my case, downright obnoxious, hearing them talking about 5 penises in your hand because they don't understand what an appendage is. I personally think they went too far with that, but it gets the point across, because on the surface level, they're insane, they're retarded, they're obnoxious, and it's difficult to take them seriously, but when you dig deeper, you find out out that those scientists are involved in some of the most fucked up things known to man, and that they drop their stupidity act the second you start finding out about these things and confronting them. That's something that Fallout games of old managed to do successfully. They'll manage to create characters that are effectively human, because on the surface they'll be, like Veronica, sassy characters, making jokes, making comments. But the second you dig a little deeper, you find out that they're characters suffering from severe and major depression due to years of isolation, losing everyone they cared for, and finding out that all they fought for and all that they held dear was for nothing. And being able to do nothing but sit and watch in despair as the very last remnants of the things they loved are destroyed by, say, a courier in Enclave power armor activating the self-destruct code of the bunker her family, in an emotional sense, is located in. And now, back on track. When reviewing the Fallout show, I pointed out the fact that the Fallout show really did not understand what Fallout was, because it took the surface-level aspects of a lot of characters and themes, put an artificially compressed digital coat of paint over it, and called it a Fallout show. And one of the overarching points that I make in my review is that this is not what Fallout is. Characters being retarded for the sake of being retarded is not what Fallout is. It does not make sense that characters who are portrayed as being super smart, super duper fucking smart, are some of the dumbest you have ever seen in history. It is a bastardization and only a surface level understanding of Fallout to have people who want nothing but capital destroy capital for the sake of making capital. By ending the world, quite literally, that is. It is inconsistent to say that ghouls, people who were mutated when the nuclear bombs fell during the nuclear apocalypse in the Fallout franchise, have been able to exist for 200 plus years, yet they can't go more than one day without taking special medicine specifically designed for ghouls, because by that logic there is then no way to explain how they survived. All of these very simple points, and the others that I mention in my review, there's a lot of them, are simply common sense. They're things that you don't need to say to understand. You cannot be a pilot with 10 years of experience if planes were only invented 5 years before. You cannot say that a character is smart when their plan could be completed and achieved in 5 minutes, but the goal of said plan is only achieved by sheer convenience and coincidence. You cannot tell me that I'm supposed to take characters seriously when they are uncharacteristically stupid even for how they are portrayed, and resort to stupid decisions and jokes even in the most serious of situations wherein all cards should be on the table. Yet, if you go look at the amount of comments in my Fallout review, that's exactly what a lot of people seem to do, completely disregarding the people who just comment without watching the video, that being most of them, that are critical of me and my points, by the way, not the people who watched it and agreed, or the people who watched it to the end and politely disagreed. No, I'm referring to the tourists who only consume the surface level aspect of the topic of conversation, do not think about it, do not consider the implications of it, and as long as they are given just barely enough to clap along like seals, they will accept it and praise it, and then get uncharacteristically tribal in their defenses by, ironically enough, accusing everyone else of being tribal. People who will present themselves as longtime fans of a franchise, very well informed of a franchise, which in reality is nothing more than an act to try to get brownie points when even they know they're lying. All with the goal of trying to prove someone wrong because they are scared of admitting that they might have problems in their arguments. Because they are scared of admitting that that thing that they enjoyed might not be as good as they portray it as being. You might have noticed that I'm talking in a very general sense because this applies to a lot of franchises, not just Fallout. And while I will stick to Fallout in just a second, you'll notice the hypocrisy the second you mention the Halo show. Because these people tend to resort to appeals to authority to make their points. Aha, I'm right, they will say, because looks at Rotten Tomatoes, Fallout got a 93% on there, and then you ask them about the Halo show, they'll say it's terrible, and then you point to the Halo show getting a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, at which point they will do one of two things, which is A, disappear, ignoring you, disappearing completely, or B, have a tard rage like Maximus, that character that they really enjoy because it reflects their builds IRL. That is to say that this tribalistic behavior effectively permits companies to do whatever they want with the franchise, whatever franchise that might be, in this case Fallout, because companies will see that people want to consume product, don't want to think about it, and just want to be excited for next product, and thus the companies will work on the assumption that, again, then people just want to consume product and be excited for next product. Consider what happened to Star Wars. Once a cultural event. When the new Star Wars movie came out, it was a cultural event. Themes everywhere, even here in Portugal, even in little old Madeira Island where I'm from. You would get mass events celebrating the release of a new Star Wars movie. It's something that people wanted to consume, if you will. But, of course, as time passed and people just wanted to consume more product and get excited for next product, Star Wars became a shell of its former self, down to the point where it's become a joke, and the iconic franchise that is now Star Wars cannot even drive enough people to Disney Plus, where Star Wars themed stuff is being streamed. And really, for all intents and purposes, the Star Wars we have now is not Star Wars and cannot be compared to the Star Wars of old. Not because I'm getting old and something like that, but just simply because the current Star Wars does not understand what Star Wars was. And mark my words, that exact same thing that happened to Star Wars won't happen to Fallout. It already is happening to Fallout. You get a bunch of people that just want to consume Star Wars themed stuff, and now Fallout themed stuff. And as the companies over time get rewarded for not putting in much effort into their franchises, into the products that they're giving you, such as in the case of what happened with Fallout 4, they will keep delivering products that are further and further and further and further away from what that original franchise is or was. Losing the identity bit by bit until it becomes just yet another product with a little coat of paint for you to consume that is, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from whatever they're competing with. Consider what happened with Fallout 4. So Fallout 4 was a Fallout game. I grit my teeth just saying that. It had improved shooting mechanics and improved graphical fidelity, sure. But on the topic of the thing that drew people in when there was a new Fallout game, that being the story, it was severely lacking, containing a story that makes absolutely no sense, is contrived, is contradictory, in a franchise that effectively established that your choices matter and your choices don't matter in that game. As 3 out of the 4 endings you get in there are literally copy-pastes of one another. It had menial quests, whereas menial quests in old Fallout games had something to it. They might have been references, they might have been clever nods. In Fallout 4, they have no depth to them. There is no real consequence for you doing that thing. Consider the tutorial quest in Fallout New Vegas, where if you help out killing a few bugs in that tutorial quest, you manage to save a person in the end, by sheer coincidence, raising your reputation and changing that settlement in question, where the tutorial location takes place, to at least a noticeable degree. Whereas in Fallout 4, one of the tutorial quests where you go to find a Mr. Handy to look for your family, in a location you know for a fact they're not in, you go around, kill a few bugs, or should I say insects, and nothing comes as a result of it. Another quest in Fallout 4 has you finding a cat, and another one of the quests has you finding a kid in a fridge that was stuck in said fridge for 200 years. Is there any impact to any of these quests? Does the settlement in question that you're helping change as a result of it? Does the faction change? Do you get any reward in particular that's differentiated from average rewards you might get for doing other quests? No. They're all just wastes of time, really. Or how about the more menial choices in the game overall, whereas I previously mentioned the endings, you also have dialogue options. In previous Fallout games, yes, Fallout 3 included, you could tackle situations differently. You could outright reject taking part in a quest, you could be a bitch, you could be a saint, you could be neutral, you could be a million things just by dialogue alone. In Fallout 4, not so much. You have 4 options, 4 of which account to yes. Because one thing that tends to happen a lot in that game is that even if you reject quests, they still get added to your quest list. It arbitrarily limits the amount of things you can say, the amount of options you have in dialogue, and the results, more often than not, end up being the same or almost the same. In any other franchise, this would have been criticized and demonized for being an absolute bastardization of what the franchise was and how it worked. Not in Fallout, though, because even though the people who made the game had to come out and say that, in this case, the 4-option dialogue wheel was a mistake, a lot of people still defended it to the fucking ends of the earth. And a lot of things that would have been inexcusable in other franchises were excused in Fallout. What was the result? Fallout 76, of course. A game that is absolutely horrible and is no different than any other generic game, in an online setting that is, that was so bad on release that it led to the creations of entire songs based on the lies of developers and publishers and directors. Todd Howard, you know the song Sweet Little Lies. A game that lied to you throughout its entire existence, starting off with no microtransactions, then some microtransactions, then only microtransactions, down to the point where if you want to start Fallout 76 now, you're effectively fucked unless you pay. And even if you do pay, you'll still be stuck grinding away for hours doing mindless repetitive missions. A game that wanted to declare itself canon but bastardizes the lore of the Fallout franchise. A game that pretends to be like previous Fallout games with dialogue options trying to give you options, but there are no options. It literally always boils down to go here, get this, or go here, shoot this, go back, repeat. And it seemed, to me at the time at least, like there was some sanity coming out of the depths of oblivion for the first time in forever, as people were criticizing and entering lawsuits a game that was based solely on lies, criticizing it for being barely functional and being a joke that, at the time this was the argument, shouldn't even be considered a Fallout game. The people who once put their foot down and said that monetization in any other way other than cosmetics was evil are now buying, in droves, microtransactions out the ass that are not only cosmetic but gives you boosts in the game, effectively rewarding the company for making the game pay to win. That's right, the people who criticized pay to win mechanics are now fully on board with pay to win mechanics. And as more content for Fallout 76, that garbage kept coming out, people kept excusing more and more and more and more things. More lore retcons? Excused. More repetitive gameplay missions? Excused. More gross oversimplification of every single mechanic? Excused. More DLC that takes recognizable locations from other games and just bastardizes them by making it a fucking collection of kill quests? Excused. And then we have the Fallout show. This piece of shit. This fucking show that can barely even be considered Fallout. The piece of shit that when I showed a scene to it to a colleague in university, he almost wanted to drop my phone and proclaimed out loud, "Ew, what the fuck," just like in that meme that you're thinking of. A show that caters to the lowest common denominator. A show that insults your intelligence. A Fallout show where the more popular defense for the show is for you not to think about Fallout when watching it. A show where another of the more popular defenses for it is to trust the guy that has literal songs made about him lying. A show so lazily put together that they got praised for having issues such as title cards being wrong and then removed after they were wrong. A show that takes a serious franchise that was occasionally broken up by some humor of some kind. A show with dialogue that makes even early teenagers cringe.
You mean use my car?
A show that, if you've been paying attention, for all intents and purposes just wants you to consume product and be excited for next product. Evidenced by the fact that the only way people can enjoy it is by turning their brains off, and even still it sucks. This is something that I pointed out in my review. This is something that's very simple. If a show cannot take itself seriously, if a show tries to present itself as serious but then can't take itself seriously, then that might just be an issue. And that's something I said in my review, but because I said it in a way that was provocative, such as by calling the show an insult to fans, just because I pointed out the fact that people are defending this as hypocritical in a provocative sense, just because I pointed out the fact that maybe
You mean use my car?
isn't exactly Shakespearean level dialogue in a provocative way, just because I pointed out the fact that fall means fall and not decline in a provocative way. People became really tribal, down to the point where a lot of the people who still watched my video, and if you go look further, even Mahler's video, their brains turn off and they become tribal. They want to defend their product and be excited for next product. Suddenly, fall does not mean fall, it means decline. Here, compare this city with this giant empire. An empire which, by the way, you can date the exact fall of to 476 AD. Let's ignore that. Let's ignore the fact that even YouTubers who make lighthearted videos on the franchise struggle to talk about certain topics and have to walk around certain words and terms. No, you see, someone said that Long Dick Johnson had a long dick, and some crazy scientists don't even know what appendages are anymore after almost 300 years of total insanity. Therefore, of course, the franchise has always been not serious. Therefore, the franchise has always been humorous, and that excuses a show that is a giant 8-hour-long joke. Let's ignore the fact that the appeal of Fallout is the story and setting, and just excuse the bastardization of the setting and story by erasing everything that came before it with a MacGuffin nuclear bomb that was added to the inventory arbitrarily. Seriously, what the fuck? Let's ignore that and just consume product, because we have to be excited for next product when it comes out. I think Ulysses from the Lonesome Road in the Fallout New Vegas DLC said it best, that when meaning gets lost, only worse things emerge from that. The meaning of Fallout has been lost. It wasn't lost with this show, it was lost with Fallout 76, and it began to be forgotten with Fallout 4. I'm not even someone who's that ready to criticize Fallout 3. I actually enjoy Fallout 3 despite recognizing all, and I do mean all, of its flaws. And so it has begun, and so we're seeing it develop. The Fallout franchise is no longer the Fallout franchise, and we deserve it. We deserve it for not gatekeeping hard enough. We deserve it for wanting to pander to the general audience. The general audience who will consume the 977th Marvel movie just because it has the Marvel logo attached to it. Because there have never been good video game adaptations in the past before. Oh no, certainly none of them. And the result of a mindset like this is on display for everyone to see with a million other franchises and now with Fallout as well. Undoubtedly, there are already people in the comment sections accusing me of being a New Vegas purist or something adjacent to that, but that's far from the point. And far from reality. Fallout has now become the very thing it criticized. While it always was, first and foremost, the criticisms of humanity's inherent traits, such as it resorting to tribalism and having an insatiable desire for greed, power, and influence, the franchise also very often criticized mindless consumerism, and yet now Fallout is just another thing for you to consume. Another thing that needs to appeal to the general audience, because without the general audience it would fail, as if that has any fucking basis in reality. There was once a time where other franchises emulated or attempted to emulate Fallout, and now Fallout is emulating other franchises. And it's all to the tune of applause of people who will spend entire months' worth of salaries consuming these products, and wasting their time developing bot accounts to criticize people who criticize them. I started off this video by mentioning the fact that I act in a very provocative way, and that, dear viewer, in case you haven't realized it, was to make a point. To make the point that I do this not just because I do feel like it to an extent, and not just because it's fun, but also because it draws these people out of their nests. Because it puts the venom of these people on display for everyone to see. All you have to do to see the true colors of the people who spend their days calling other people toxic is to scroll through the comment sections of my video reviewing the Fallout show. And it's as clear as day, augmented by the fact that I respond to these people just to bait them into saying something even more stupid and so they can help me in the algorithm. It's very apparent, is what I'm trying to say. Now, you may be feeling a little bit black-pilled by this entire video. This video might have gone on a bit too long in your eyes. And I guess that to an extent it did, but that was to highlight the severity of the situation. I'm not saying the world is about to end, but I'm saying that a franchise that a lot of us love is ending, or is at least in a very dark place. But for once in my videos, I'm not going to end with a black pill, I'm going to end with a white pill, and that is by telling you the story of another franchise. And that franchise is the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. A franchise that should have died not once, not twice, but 3 times over by now, but didn't, and is actually making a very strong comeback. And why is it making that comeback? Well, very simply, the Sonic franchise might, and the Sonic fanbase might have a lot of issues to them, a lot of cringe. But if there is one thing you can never, and I mean never, fault the Sonic fanbase for, is gatekeeping. They gatekeep out the fucking ass and give hell to the devs every single time they do something wrong. Constantly, the Sonic franchise tried to pander to the general audience with trash like this.
Baldy nose hair! That's the best thing I've heard all day!
And constantly they were trashed for it, and the result of that trashing, I'll tell you what it was. It was Sonic Frontiers, a game that, despite its jank and inherent flaws, gave so much strength back to the franchise that a franchise that struggled to put out a game per half-decade is now coming out with a half a dozen of them in the last few years and in the coming years. Movies that advertise themselves as being lore-specific, lore-accurate, and for all intents and purposes, they are. And the same thing, my friends, can happen to Fallout. It shows that all you have to do is keep criticizing it and let it crash and burn by voting with your wallets over time. And when the franchise is no longer recognizable and is set on fire, once said fire dies off, a situation will arise where Fallout can return to what it actually was, properly speaking. It gets worse before it gets better, but it always gets better in the end. Thank you for watching.